What's good, y'all? It's Brian back with episode of Blurting While Dad. It's been a while. Had some it's been a very challenging last couple of weeks for me and my family. Without going into it, because this is going to be something I'll talk about in a future episode regarding um grief and working through grief and processing grief as an adult with kids, because it hits different when when you have children that you have to kind of guide through the pathway and the walkway of grief. um, and so um, I'll be doing a episode about that, and basically the maladaptive shit that I picked up. Well, let me fix that camera. The maladaptive shit that I picked up as a black Xennial between Gen X and millennial. Some of the maladaptive traits that I picked up regarding processing grief and the like. And so that'll be a future episode. Not now. I'm not in the headspace to kind of chop it up now, but my father-in-law passed suddenly about 2 weeks ago, and it's been pretty rough on the fam. And so just kind of emerging a little bit out of that shell of grief, and really trying to get back into a little bit of normalcy. He used to watch my show. And so this one's for you, Dad. Um, and I'm gonna be doing another one specifically for you and kind of talking about it, but I'm not in that space where I can talk about it and continue the flow on. But like I said, been a challenging couple of weeks. We're dealing with the death of a loved one and helping my kids kind of navigate through that, helping my wife navigate through that, and trying to keep my head locked in and in the game and stuff too. And one of the things you pick up, specifically if you are black Xennial, raised by black, my mom wasn't necessarily a boomer, but kind of in that sub generation. You pick up this really insane kind of work ethic where you show up to work no matter what. I've gone to work. I've gone to work after experiencing the death of somebody I grew up with since I was 3 years old, and I processed it. And the way I processed it was by going to work, and that was not the way to process that. And so, one of the challenges is when you're dealing with the loss of a loved one, it's making sure that you're peaceful with yourself. And so that's the step I'm trying to take. So the last couple of weeks, I've been kind of MIA, working, dealing with my family and whatnot, as we kind of shuffle into our new normal. And that's been challenging. So I'm going to have an entire episode about black parenting while grieving, and the maladaptive shit that I've picked up as an older black male. The John Henryism, that's the kind of concept, is where you're going to work yourself to death. You're going to work through every bad thing that happens to you. And you're doing that because you got to show that that you're impervious to the shit. It's crazy. But I'm going to have a whole episode about that, but it's not going to be this week. This week, essentially, I'm counter programming the State of the Union address, which I wasn't necessarily planning on, but it is what it is. We get to chop it up about some of the stuff that I put on my little bit of my journalism bag, talking about some things that we know regarding the Epstein stuff and all the other stuff, basically giving a State of the Union, or my version of the State of the Union as it exists right now. So guys, I apologize. We will be back to comic books and nerd stuff next week. By then, I will have finished the final episode of Wonder Man and be ready to chop it up about that on the stream. I'm really enjoying it. I think it's a nice departure for Marvel in terms of what they're doing in terms of super hero television shows. I like the change up where we get to actually see some real shit, and it's not in the backdrop of supervillains and things along those lines. It's normal person with superpowers trying to live as normal as possible life while balancing out that piece of it. And I'm really fucking with Wonder Man. I'm enjoying everything about the show, even the in the weeds meta commentary on acting and in the Marvel universe, in the MCU and stuff. I'm really enjoying the entire thing. And so I'm messing Wonder Man. I'm I'm excited to see what the final episode holds for me. And so I'll be talking about that next week and kind of giving my review, in addition to talking about processing grief as a parent who's and kids that are grieving and a wife that's grieving. And so we'll talk about all that stuff. So anyway, so tonight, and I was planning on kind of live streaming this and having this running in the background concurrently. I decided against it. Let my hair down. I decided kind of against it because I don't want to deal with copyright strikes. And I know that the State of the Union is considered public domain, but the feeds that are broadcasting it are not. And I don't want to, I definitely don't want to take an L to the administration or whoever the powers that be by trying to live stream the State of the Union and comment on the same at the same time. I don't want to do that stuff. So this is my counter programming. I'll probably sit down and watch the State of the Union and have another episode, maybe a mini-sode at some point this week, to kind of give my breakdown on what I think happened. Okay, so the president's going to have a State of the Union. I'm going to give the state of our institutions in this country. Okay, and so the thesis tonight is we're going to talk about some authoritarian drift, and it doesn't begin with tanks. It doesn't begin with missiles or armed forces. It ends with it, but it doesn't begin with it. It starts with capturing the institution and selective transparency. And I know that selective transparency ain't a new thing for the United States government. That's kind of our stock and trade. Doing shit on the sly, throwing a rock and hide in your hands. That is the American way. That is the American government's way of dealing with shit. But we're in a new age where they're throwing the rock and not hiding their hands. They're just saying they didn't throw the rock. You're sitting there holding, you got smacked in the head with the rock, you're bleeding, and you're like, hey, man, why you throw a rock at me? I throw no rock. So it's not even throwing a rock and hiding your hands. It's just throwing a rock and denying that you threw the rock in the first fucking place. So that's kind of where we are with the government. It's constantly, daily, somebody's playing in our face kind of thing. Okay? So that's what it is. We're kind of distinguishing confirmed facts from allegations and from speculation. And so I know that there's a ton of Epstein this, Epstein that, a lot of speculation floating around out there. I'm going to try to stick to what's been confirmed. We can hint and intimate at things, but it doesn't necessarily serve any purpose if I'm using my platform to expound on pointless, or not pointless, unproven conspiracy theories. I'll let other people peddle in that. If you're looking for that level of sexiness on the show, we ain't doing that. The only sexiness is you're going to get is this. This is all you're going to get. I'm not going to go into the salacious and more unproven sides of the Epstein thing. I'll talk about what's been proven and what I can back up through what I know, what I was able to kind of suss out with my journalistic hat on. And like I said, hopefully this is something you can watch instead of the State of the Union, so you ain't got to watch that meandering, loudmouth bullshit that it's going to pass for the State of the Union. It's going to be an old man ranting at clouds for 90 minutes. So anyway, first things first, we're going to talk about creeping fascism. Isn't that fun? Don't we just love talking about creeping fascism and Christian nationalism? Okay, here's the thing. So when we talk about Christian nationalism and white nationalism are kind of cousins. They they exist in the same family. Some of them have relatives that they're closer to than to others. So Christian nationalism is kind of friendly with white separatist groups and people that want ethno states and things along those lines. And so when we talk about Christian nationalism, I'm basically saying white nationalism without saying white nationalism. Okay, and Christian nationalism is measurable. It's not necessarily a fringe case. And I got to make sure I read my notes right. PRRI February survey reports that about one third of Americans qualify as adherents or sympathizers of Christian nationalism. That's a crazy ass number. And I'm not saying that it is an intentional thing. I'm saying that we have a media apparatus and an administrative apparatus at the top of the government that is soft pedaling a lot of Christian nationalist themes out to people. If you believe that we have to save the country and return to some perceived formal greatness, and that your Christian way of life is under siege, you qualify you fall into the hallway of Christian nationalism. You may not have opened the door yet, but you're walking down the hallway. Because at the end of the day, still in the United States, the most practiced religion in this country is Christianity. And the idea that just because the representation is down a little bit, that somehow it's under siege is ridiculous. But it also allows people to build extreme positions that justify extreme shit that they do. And so that's the danger of being in the hallway of Christian nationalism. So it's not necessarily intentional, but a lot of people exist in that hallway. If you believe in what is it that palagenesis, where the only way the country can be saved is through a rebirth, a revival of a specific ethos, and we're on this doomed path, you're in the hallway of Christian nationalism. And typically, when you start drilling into what are the solutions to existing in this place where you think that the only way is a forced rebirth of the country and from the ashes kind of stuff, typically when you start sussing it out, it ends up on some pretty dark stuff because it requires removal of specific people. And so that's where we're sitting at. Okay. Support with Christian nationalism does conflate with correlates with favorable views of President Poopy Pants and the Republican state legislative control, because a lot of it has to do with this culture war stuff where you have people that you're mad at or people whose lifestyle or whose existence you don't necessarily jibe with. And instead of just being a fucking adult and dealing with it and minding your own business, you have to find a way to try to constrict them into what you believe or remove them from your site. And so that's where that goes. And so we're dealing with it locally in the state of Nebraska. We are all kinds of culture war bullshit that doesn't mean anything to anybody except the people that are presenting it. And it's red meat for people that don't have real issues to deal with, or they don't want to face the real economic issues that they're struggling with, because this is an agriculture state that is being carried by, that's essentially being carried by its two largest population centers, and they hate our guts for it. They hate Omaha and Lincoln. They've been trying to punish us for years. And realistically, if Omaha and Lincoln went away out of, say, Nebraska, the rest of the state will kind of collapse in upon itself. And I'm not talking about just Omaha. I'm talking about the metro. So that's Omaha, Douglas, Sarpy County, all that stuff. I know you don't care about it if you're not here, but if you're local, you know what I'm talking about. Okay. And so white evangelical Protestants are the demographic most aligned with a lot of this Christian nationalist stuff. When you're talking about altering the way that we teach history so that we have a history that frames us and creates a narrative where we are always the good guys, that is aligned with a level of nationalism where you require your history and the way that your history is taught in schools to carry forth this narrative of good guys and bad guys. And when you want your history to reflect the narrative bias that you currently possess, where you see things, where you see people as antagonists or protagonists to your existence, that's where we're going with it. And that's a nationalist streak of it. Then you add in the fact that people think that Christianity is under attack, and the only way to do it is to purge these specific group of people and get them out of the public sphere and remove them from your view, or remove them from any seats of power. Now you're playing in the Christian nationalist game. Okay. And that is an unfortunate thing. Okay. And so the source from that is the PPRI, or was it PRRI? I wrote this down, PRRI, state by state analysis of nationalism. Okay. So when 1/3 of the country holds majoritarian religious governance ideology, that's not fringe, bro. Like that's not a fringe thing. That's pretty it's a policy block. That's a pretty mainstream idea. When 1/3 of the country holds an idea, that's pretty mainstream. And a lot of people who are in the Christian nationalist space wouldn't consider themselves Christian nationalists until you start pulling and extracting pieces like, do you think that the country needs to be saved Do you feel like the only way that we're going to do it is through some kind of rebirth or resurrection kind of process where the country has to die some kind of death and then be reborn clean and free, and then it's a return to the old way of doing things? That's Christian nationalism. Okay. Um, and so you just and domestic extremism is not like this hypothetical thing. Some people are really, really enmeshed in this. You talk to people who escape some of the more extreme sects of the Christian nationalists, and you realize some of these ideas are quite mainstream. Let's look at it like this. Pete Hegseth, who is the Department of Defense, was it the Department of War? Now, whatever goofy shit the Department of War, right? He goes to a Christian fundamentalist church, which really parades around a Christian nationalism where they believe in the hierarchy or patriarchal view of the world. And essentially his pastor, the main pastor that Pete Hegseth fucks with, is on record saying that he doesn't think women should be able to vote. And I bet if you dig a little bit deeper, he probably doesn't think black people should be able to vote either. Because like I said, you scratch a Christian nationalist, you catch a white nationalist, and that's just how it works. But it's mainstream to the point where normally that would be exclusionary criteria. Remember with Jeremiah Wright, Pastor Jeremiah Wright, that is loose connection with Obama somehow, some way, and they made him like the boogeyman of Obama and all this other stuff. They tied him to that, even though the connection wasn't as strong as they wanted to make it seem. Pete Hegseth still goes to Bro's church. He's been on this dude's podcast. Like, he still shares space with this guy. And a lot of the things that he's preached from the pulpit about women not being able to serve in combat roles, not being able to vote, all that other stuff that he serves from the pulpit is actually some shit that Pete Hegseth has been pushing through the Department of, I'm not calling it the Department of War, man. Fuck that. It's the Department of Defense. And so a lot of stuff he pushes through there is really comes from the pulpit. And so there is a strong connection. There's a strong ideological connection between those two things. And we're bullshitting and lying to ourselves when we think that that's not the case. Okay. So U.S. security assessments and academic research consistently identify white supremacists and far-right extremist groups as a top domestic terrorism threat category. It's been consistent for a long ass time. They try to make it seem like, whenever somebody has a mass shooting, they try to say, is this a trans shooter? There's always some kind of narrative out there like saying this person's trans or whatnot, whether it's true or not. There's this weird disavowal of him being, the shooter being part of some kind of fundamentalist thing. But they're overrepresented in people that get arrested for this kind of stuff or people that get identified. It's still considered a top domestic terrorism threat category. Okay. The source of that is federal threat assessments and some public reporting and some academic research. Like I said, I'm summarizing a lot of my points here. Okay. Because I'm trying to get through a lot of information. When the security state classifies something as a persistent threat, that's not Twitter panic. That's a documented risk. And that risk doesn't change just because the administration changes. So if an administration flags white nationalist separatist groups as a major domestic terrorism risk, that doesn't change just because you get somebody different in office. It just means that the focus of the focus on that group is going to be removed. So they get to operate in the shadows again. Right? We used to talk and say, well, where are all the Proud Boys and all that other stuff? Well, they got government jobs, so they don't need to be Proud Boying as much as loudly in the streets. They're getting paid now to do it. So you got to be cognizant of that. Okay. And so here's the thing. Authoritarian drift includes institutional capture, erosion of democratic norms, information control, and selective enforcement. We are in all of these things. Okay. The institutions have been captured. They've upended a lot of the veterans who have been in these institutions. And here's the thing. You're talking to me. I'm not a huge fan of the American structure of government and how it's being used to create, you know, if you're a black or brown person, you've experienced levels of fascism in this country, regardless of whoever is at the top of the administration, locally, through state police and federal police enforcement or whatnot. So that's something that's kind of an aside. But now you're starting to see it kind of spread all over. A lot of the stuff that was stirred up with what happened in Minnesota with those 2 lives lost in Minnesota. People were out in the streets and stuff like that. There have been black and brown people that have been getting killed by ICE and ICE enforcement without any sort of people being out in the streets or anything in a massive scale, aside from people who are in their community. And so we do need to talk about that. Okay. But we're not going to sit there and chop it up about that. That is, I've talked about it before. We're going to get to it again. All right. But so the capture of the institutions, and we're seeing selective enforcement, right? So we're seeing right now, and this is a theory I'm putting out there. We're kind of at a low, like we've seen declines in incarcerated people. Okay. Well, at the same time, we're seeing a lot of activity in the private sector to build private prisons and private detention centers. Okay. They have to replace those numbers somehow to justify that. Okay. And the government officials get kickbacks from these people who own these private prisons. They get campaign donations for people on these private prisons. The private prison people get government contracts. And so when you start to see a decline in the population of people that you use to shove into these detention facilities, you have to find new people to put in the detention facilities. And so that's why migrant detention is big business right now. Business is a booming for a lot of those detention centers. And I don't want to make private prisons this massive boogeyman, because the carceral state is a problem all across the board. It's not just unique to private prisons, but there's the oversight on private prisons is kind of crazy. You understand, you look at corporations being in charge of taking care of people, and typically when you have that kind of things, more times than not, the corporate interests are going to outweigh the people that they serve. And so you see it in a lot of, specifically some retirement homes and whatnot, where you have somebody that is looking at the bottom line and they're like, how do we slash prices? Well, we lower our quality of care to the minimum so that we can capture as much money off the top on this thing as possible. Now imagine doing that in prisons. It happens in private youth detention all the time, where private youth detention is absolutely abysmal. And it's because they know they can get away with it. They know they can slash the care that they provide to the bare bones. The facilities and training and food and all the other overhead that it takes to run a residential facility, they can slash that to the absolute bare minimum. And as long as you're essentially keeping prisoners alive, you can run that and make a good profit off of it. And the way that how cooked Americans are when it comes to people in jail, and how quickly we dehumanize them, a lot of people feel like that is deserved. That somebody who is locked up for, regardless of what the reason is, all the mistreatment that they receive at the hands of the state on behalf of the state is their fault, and they're deserving of it. I got way ahead of my outline, so that was something I had for my last segment. Okay. Authoritarian rarely arrives as a declaration. It kind of is, it's just a preference. Like, authoritarianism is just another methodology of holding in power and stuff like that. Okay. So oligarchy and policy capture, that's kind of where we're at right now. So when we talk about oligarchy, we're talking about the power of not monarchy, where power resides with one person. We're talking about power distributed among a few people. And really, what we're talking about is the few corporations that have the most money to dump into our political system. And that's what we're up against right now. As a citizen right now, my free speech is up against a entity that has unlimited amounts of money, and since money is considered free speech, they get more free speech than I do. You know, Elon gets more free speech than I do because he has unlimited amounts of money that he can dump into the political system to basically push forward whatever policy he wants. And there's no checks and balances on it. And why would they? Why would these politicians that some of these politicians that have enriched themselves in a massive way through lobbyists, through dark money, through once they retire, they get to step into some cushy advisory positions and stuff. Why would they put limitations on how much money they get access to? You're asking the foxes to watch the hen house. That's what you're up against. Okay. And so the thing about it is, so Gillen's and Page's peer-reviewed 2014 study found that policy outcomes align strongly with economic elites and organized business interests more than average citizens. You don't need a study to tell you that. Okay. You can tell what lobbyists are pumping money into the government based on what the policies that are prioritized by your elected officials are. Okay. One of the things that's really interesting in the state of Nebraska is we had this huge outcry about, was it synthetic meat or whatever, a thing that I don't even think, I didn't even think about it on a day-to-day basis as a thing to even raise my concern. But we had a huge ballyhoo about it because the meat lobby, the beef lobby specifically, dumped a lot of money into our local officials' hands and said, this is your priority issue. And they forced it through. They made some kind of bill. They wasted a lot of legislative time forcing this thing through about regulating how synthetic meat is labeled, which is such a small cottage industry at this point, and a non-concern. But for the beef industry, it was such a big deal because they wanted people to, be able to say, yeah, I'll go with the real stuff, which most people are going to do anyway. It was a non-issue for everybody except the beef industry. And somehow that became a legislative priority for us. And I know it became a legislative priority for us because that's where the money came from. That's where the money showed up from. And the guy with the money gets listened to. And you, who actually have real concerns about your affordability, access to healthcare, marijuana legalization, all kinds of other things that are actual issues, funding of education, things that are actual real issues that people care about, those take a back seat. I'd much rather have a bill that makes school lunch free for all kids across the state than to have to worry about, well, at least we got the synthetic meat marked in the market. Who gives a fuck about that except the beef industry? And so that's who determined what the policy was, what our policy, what our agenda, what our legislative priorities was determined by the person with the money. And a lot of dark money gets dumped into politicians here by Pete Ricketts, who was our state senator, who also is a scion of the Ricketts family that used to own TD Ameritrade, and they have more money than anybody that you've ever known, or the whole collection of everybody that you know and everybody that you've met your entire life. They got more money than all of them put combined. And Pete Ricketts influences every major and minor political race in this state. He is the kingmaker. He determines who gets money and who doesn't. And so if it is economic, or if it's a legislative priority for him, invariably it's going to be a legislative priority for the Senate, or for the state legislature. It's going to be a legislative priority for the governor. His big thing right now is fighting tooth and nail to keep, because the state of Nebraska voted on medical marijuana pretty overwhelmingly. Like, they came out and said, hey, we think this should be a thing, this should be allowed. And we voted, and the votes were saying, hey, we should legalize at least medical marijuana. And Pete Ricketts said no, he doesn't like that. And so he's been pulling every string that he can to hamstring the efforts and the process to establish a commission and all that other stuff. He's been the one dumping all the money into there. He's been the one that's been determining which politicians he's going to prop up and give money to so that they can carry forth what his belief of what the world should look like is. That's what we're up against, y'all. Some rich person in your city and in your state who has access to the governor or the mayor or city council determines what your laws are. And more times than not, they determine what your laws are based on what benefits them and what's going to drive money into their pockets or what meets whatever their narrow interests are. And they're going to force you to conform to them. And that's the game that's being played right now. This is what happens. This is what happens when you allow unlimited money to flow into politics. And like I said, the Supreme Court said money is free speech. And so we're kind of screwed with that. But when policy tracks, it becomes more concentrated wealth and public opinion. That's when you have oligarchy. Okay. That's the academic definition. All right. And so I'm reading the definition. When policy tracks concentrated wealth more than public opinion, that is oligarchic behavior by academic definition. We're an oligarchy. All right. If you don't want oligarchy, you need to be strident and voting out. You need to be strident and researching who's getting money from who and voting out the people that are using their seats to push forth the agenda of billionaires or whoever has the most money. Vote them out. I don't care if they agree. If you agree with what they're saying, vote them out, because eventually they're going to use their money to influence laws that affect you, and you want them out. So that's what it is. Okay. Let's get into Epstein. Let's talk about it. All right. So I'm going, like I said before, I don't want to get into the sensationalized stuff because there's so much sensationalized coverage. We saw the whole thing about who was in the call logs and who was on the, what was it, the tip, the FBI tip thing. I'm gonna be honest with you. When it comes to the Epstein case, the people that were on the FBI tip line, more times than not, these were people that were unverified, unsubstantiated. Somebody decided that they wanted to call them in and report them for being connected with Epstein. Anybody could have got called in. Okay. And when we talk about people that get mentioned in the files, if Epstein mentioned you, whether you were related or you were, whether you were involved in any shit that he was, if he just happened to mention you as a person that existed, you're in the file. And a lot of people are getting caught up in the bullshit. And that's what the intention is. That's why they dropped 3 million pages on the public, unredacted first, because they knew that would get everybody talking. They knew that would foment outrage, and they knew that people would skim it and leap to their own conclusions. And that's why they did it, to maximize the level of confusion regarding the Epstein case. That's why they dropped 3 million unredacted or sloppily redacted files on the public, and then strategically held back 3 million. Like, we didn't talk about the other parts of it that didn't, that I think it's more than 3 million, but the other parts of it that didn't get dropped, the majority of it that did not drop, but they dropped this unredacted sloppy mess of files without any context of what this thing actually means, whether it's email correspondence, whether it's tip line stuff, which is, you can almost more or less, unless you have multiple instances of somebody getting called in from multiple people, you still have to take that with a grain of salt. But you can almost disregard some of these tip line things because it's just somebody with the axe to grind who wants to get somebody in trouble, or actual literal correspondence from the man himself and talking about what people did. Okay. I'm not going to get into the Saudi, somebody who was in the House of Saud who thanked Epstein for the torture movie. We're not getting into that. We're not getting into the entire thing about them basically making a bait, like where the goal was to impregnate these young ladies and then sell their babies off. That's dark, nightmarish kind of shit. I'm not getting into that sensationalized stuff yet. I need to sit down with it. And I have not been in a place where I want to infect my mind with that kind of crap yet. I will, but I'm not there yet. So we're talking surface level. What can be proven, what can be easily disproven. Let's get into it. In 2008, there was a non-prosecution agreement that shielded Epstein from federal charges and limited exposure to for potential co-conspirators. Okay, that was, I think, that was Acosta, who was the Attorney General of Florida, if I'm not mistaken, at the time. He came up with this cockamamie kind of way to essentially gave Jeffrey Epstein house arrest for 13 months in exchange for all the evil that he had been doing. Okay. And then somehow, because this guy had been in previous administrations, he ends up becoming, I think, labor secretary off of that. All right. And so Epstein got a sweetheart deal. There's stories about how Epstein was calling to get specific prosecutors pulled off the case if they're too aggressive. And for whatever reason, the Attorney General of Florida complied with that, which leads me to believe that there were some more powerful players in the room who were involved, who were able to kind of put their thumb on the scale. Sorry, guys, I got a nail that's kind of bothering me. And so anyway, that first agreement was pretty terrible. And it was kind of a slap on the wrist. Now, Pam Bondi takes over, Attorney General of Florida. She has new evidence that comes in that's a little bit that implicates Epstein in a lot more bullshit, a lot more shit. And at that point in time, she has the ability to throw out the original agreement and reopen the case, and she chooses not to. And so she declined to go any further on it, knowing the depth and breadth of this man's depravity. She declined to revisit it. And so now that's who's in charge of the case. And her boss mysteriously is implicated in a lot of files that literally today, I think today or the other day, they're just finding out a lot of the stuff that he's mentioned in is mysteriously been extracted from the files, where they have evidence that it existed before and now it's not there anymore. Okay. So the DOJ maintains a public Epstein document portal that states it will be updated when more materials are identified. Okay. That's what the library exists. The Epstein story is not one monster. It's a demonstration of how institutions negotiate with wealth. This is the man that had access to a lot of money and access to dossiers of a lot of people who were high up in education, finance, politics, legal field. Like all these people are high up in corporate, and having access and information about how a lot of these people are secret degenerates is very powerful leverage. It's a very powerful leverage to hold over somebody. And you can get a lot of people who are in some very powerful seats to do what you want to when you have blackmail material on them. I maintain that Epstein was probably an asset for multiple governments, including this one, whose job it was to collect information on rich and powerful people in finance and politics, in industry, not necessarily entertainment as much, but rich and powerful people. He is compiling dossiers to blackmail them, and he worked for a couple of different governments. Ours was included in that. That's what my take is. That's my speculation. Okay. The transparency controversy. The Trump-related materials are being withheld or removed. They've disappeared. NPR is reporting that the DOJ withheld or removed certain materials referencing allegations involving our president from the public database intentionally. Pulled them out. Why? It's not necessarily a security thing. It is an administrative security thing. It's not national security. Okay. And the source that comes from is NPR. Okay. House Oversight Democrats have raised formal questions about whether the Department of Justice complied fully with the disclosure obligations. We're never going to know. Okay. Allegations in the files are not convictions, y'all. And I think we need to understand the way that we interpret this, because this requires, going through the Epstein files requires a level of media literacy that is lacking in a lot of our media discourse. It just is. It's not present in a lot of media discourse. Okay. And so allegations in the files are not convictions, but withholding or removing catalog materials under transparency law is a credibility crisis. It damages the credibility of the institution. Why is the Department of Justice pulling out very specific things that reflect their boss in a negative way? Okay. So we're dealing with high level proximity and inconsistent statements. AP's reporting that AP reports confirms that Lutnick acknowledged meeting Harold Lutnick, who is our Commerce Secretary. It confirms that he acknowledged meeting Epstein after the 2008 conviction, including a lunch on Epstein's private islands. Man said he lived a couple doors down from him, like he admitted that he lived next door to him. And they made some BS story about how he and his wife didn't want to be in the room with the disgusting guy and all this other stuff. Come to find out, he's all in Epstein's mentions. He's all all kinds of correspondence between those two. Okay. Lutnick's statements contradicted earlier claims that he cut ties after the 2008 conviction. And it's prompting public calls for his resignation from Adam Schiff. It should be called, we should all be kind of demanding his resignation, but since we don't like accountability in this country, that's not going to happen. He's going to hold on to his seat until he steps down, or until he outlives his usefulness for the current administration and he's tossed on the woodpile. Okay. And that comes from the AP. Okay. Inconsistent testimony about proximity to a sex trafficker is wild, bro. It's not gossip. We're talking about a governance issue. And all kinds of people who have been loosely, tangentially, I can't say the word, have been loosely tied or implicated, through third parties, or they know a guy who know a guy who knew a guy, are getting caught up in the crossfire. But people who had direct conversational access to Epstein are able to skate by because of their proximity to the seat of power in this country. Is wild. Let's talk about Elon Musk and Steve Bannon. Now, Steve Bannon, for those that don't know, is kind of the architect of a lot of the MAGA movement. He saw that Gamergate was a thing, and I'm not going to go too far into it, but Gamergate was kind of the genesis of a lot of online hyper right-wing culture after 2015, 2016. And it was one of the things that led to the MAGA movement sweeping through and getting Trump in office. And so Steve Bannon found a way to leverage that. He was friendly with a lot of those guys involved. He also was friendly with 4chan and 8chan boards. He was the one that figured out the power of memes, and that memes can actually drive public policy, which is wild. And he leveraged that and leveraged the Twitter machine, and basically, figured out how to tie all these things together to get the world that he wanted. And for those that know, Steve Bannon is kind of the architect of a lot of stuff. Sorry, my hair is kind of... let me move that out of the way. All right, cool. House Democrats released Epstein schedules showing planned meetings with Elon Musk and Steve Bannon. Now, Elon will sit up there and tell you that he wasn't involved with bro. Here's the thing. There's email correspondence that shows that Elon was up there begging Epstein, like, how can I be down, bro? Like, I got to get on the island, bro. What's up? It's Christmas. I got to come out. Why don't you bring me and the fam? We could swing. Like, he was begging this dude to get on. And when the most low level degenerate scumbag on the planet that doesn't want you around, that says something, right? Like, Elon Musk, Jeffrey Epstein's like, nah, I don't want Elon around, bro. But Elon was essentially begging Epstein to get on the island, knowing full well, this is after the convictions, knowing full well what he's up to, because there's even an email that they have where Epstein essentially hints like, hey, the UN's going to be doing this big shebang bang. There's going to be people that you want to meet there. And Elon's like, I don't want to meet with diplomats. And Epstein had to clarify, like, nobody there's going to be over the age of 25. Come on out. Come through. That's what we're talking about, bro. Elon was all into it, bro. He was all the way down for it, bro. And he was trying to get his best to get on that damn island, bro. Okay. But yeah, he had scheduled meetings showing planned meetings with Elon Musk and Steve Bannon. This is from Reuters. The schedules do not prove meetings occurred, but and it also doesn't mean that no crimes were alleged in those scheduling documents. But I mean, if you try to meet with a sex trafficker, bro, like you try to get on his calendar. That's all I'm saying. Proximity is not proof of a crime, but mapping proximity kind of reveals who was involved in the ecosystem. Okay. Alex Costa. So I talked about him earlier. He is the appointed, he is the one who approved the original non-prosecution agreement framework during the 2006 to 2008 case. And he later served in the Trump administration. Commerce Secretary, if I'm not mistaken, or Labor Secretary. That comes from The Guardian. The prosecutor who approved the deal later joined the cabinet. That is how elite systems protect themselves. The one man that had access to all Epstein stuff up until that point, we're going to bring into the administration and give him a seat, a power, and make sure that his bills are paid and give him access. Because when you're labor secretary, you sit in that seat and you can transition into some pretty cushy jobs. Because I'm not mistaken, he is on the board of Newsmax right now, and he's on one of those paid board positions. So when you are secretary of anything in an administration, you can transition out of that position into the private sector and land some pretty sweet jobs that don't require you to actually do work. It don't require you to really do anything. And so that's what he parlayed that into. But the benefit for the administration is this guy knows pretty much more about this Epstein case than just about anybody. He's seen a lot of background stuff. He knows where the bodies are buried, figuratively and literally. If we give him a sweet position in here, we can buy his silence. That's what they did. They bought his silence. Epstein got a sweetheart deal, and now we're going to bring him into the fold. Now, I'm not saying that somehow Acosta had this foresight that that Trump was going to win and he was going to bring him in. I'm saying that he knew that there was going to be some other tertiary benefits from other people that were mentioned in those files, whether it's campaign financing money or access to sweet gigs or insider trading information or whatever he used to benefit from that information. He knew that information was going to benefit him more ways than one. Again, I posit that Jeffrey Epstein was probably higher. He was connected on a higher level than most people want to admit about their own government. He was pretty highly connected. And a lot of the directives that came down about him came down from the higher levels of some of these systems, right? Okay. The prosecutor approved that deal was appointed to Trump's cabinet. That's Alex Acosta. That's how they protect themselves, bro. Okay. Pam Bondi. So she has faced congressional questioning about the Department of Justice's handling of the Epstein file releases and the entire transparency process, because this is about as clear as mud. Okay. This comes from the PBS NewsHour, and this is just general coverage of the oversight hearing. The fixer doesn't eliminate the scandal. The fixer manages the fallout. So that's kind of what her role is. She is designed to contain the fallout and keep this from hitting as many people as possible. One notable thing that I'm not a fan of Marjorie Taylor Greene by any stretch of the imagination, but one notable thing that we need to mention is one of her things when she decided that she's going to step away from this whole thing is she mentioned that when Trump called her regarding her pursuit of releasing the Epstein files, one of the things that he screamed at her was a lot of people, my friends are going to get hurt by this. It's Pam Bondi's job to contain this. She's not seeking justice for anybody. She's trying to contain the fallout of this. Okay. That's what's happening right now. She's containing the fallout and making sure the right people get listed and the wrong people get hidden. Okay. I doubt that we see Prince Andrew get jammed up. I don't think that anything's going to happen to him necessarily, aside from some public humiliation stuff. I don't know that we're ever going to see any powerful people go down for this Epstein thing until you have a complete overhaul of the administration. And a lot of them are elderly. They probably won't even be around by the time that we actually uncover how deep this goes. Okay. Um, and so her job is to manage the fallout. That's what she's in that seat for. That's why when that congressional hearing happened, I think it was last week before, where she is, they're asking her about the Epstein release and everything. She didn't answer a single question. All she did was attack every single person that asked her a question because she didn't want to have the conversation, because she knows that conversation doesn't look good. She knows that she can't necessarily answer any real questions about it without implicating her boss. And so the best way to avoid having to do any of that is to go on the attack. And that's what she did in that public hearing. It was one of the strangest hearings, and I'm a political nerd. I watch this stuff on C-SPAN. Like, I sit down and watch this shit on C-SPAN. That's how bad I like, bro. It's pretty sad. But I sit there and watch this stuff on C-SPAN. I've never seen anything like that. That was crazy. Most entertaining congressional hearings I've ever seen, but she was bound and determined not to answer a fucking question from them. Okay. So what does that mean for the Epstein case? This is going to remain an albatross for as long as this administration exists, and we're never going to get all the details. They're going to suppress as much as humanly possible until the people that can face consequences are dead, essentially, like until they die of old age or something along those lines, and then they'll never face any consequences. Okay, that's what we're up against. And so, unfortunately, until we actually have somebody who platforms the victims and the victims actually are allowed to speak and testify, we're not going to get to any measurable truth. But what the Epstein thing shows is there was a network of very powerful men who were able to basically do whatever they want to do. And one of the things that they mention a lot of times about that billionaire wealth is one of the things that happens with people, that once you get past a certain threshold of money, your sense of reality starts to warp because you can alter reality with your money and laws no longer apply to you. And I honestly believe that that's what's happening. Again, I also do believe that Epstein was an asset for multiple governments. I'm not going to say the government's on here. But ours is included, and a couple of our very close allies are included in that, and a couple of enemies are included in that. I think he was an intelligence asset, and his job was to compile as much blackmail material as he possibly could on very rich and powerful people who are connected in industry, connected in finance, connected in academia, connected in legal, the legal system. Dershowitz, what's up, bro? What's up, Alan Dershowitz? A lot of these people were connected in these levels. And so, but his job was to compile material on them so that they can be leveraged by other governments to say, if you don't do what we tell you to do, we will release what your connection is to this monster. And what I'm going to say is a lot of people in this country have to reckon and square themselves with the fact that a lot of our government, and a lot of allied governments that are allies to us were absolutely fine with using children as collateral damage. They view children as collateral damage. They fed children into this machine, into this pit of monsters, so that they can get their blackmail material on the target people they targeted. And they saw children as collateral. So whenever you hear when these people sit up here and talk about protecting the children, just remember that that's what their version of protecting the children is. They're protecting the children, preserving them so that they can be fed to monsters. And a lot of our government was complicit in that. They were fine with it. There's some dark shit in the Epstein files, bro. And I'm trying not to go too far into mentioning it yet, because I do have to put some context and some trigger warnings and a couple of other things that can emotionally and destabilize somebody's mental well-being. Because there's some really ugly stuff. And I worked abuse neglect cases, bro. I've seen horrific cases of child abuse, and this shocked me. This shocked me. I'm pretty jaded. I've seen pretty much everything. And this shocked me. So there's some dark shit in the Epstein files, bro. Okay. So like I said, Pam Bondi's role is to mitigate the fallout of this. She is not there to investigate shit. I don't know what y'all think is going to happen. She's not there for justice. If she was there for justice, she would have acknowledged the Epstein, the accusers and the victims. She would acknowledge them. She would be interviewing them. She doesn't care about that stuff. Her job is one, you need to protect the people who are in the seats of power. That's Trump, that's Ludnick, that's anybody else in that administration who's tied to this thing. Okay. So let's talk about immigration and detention. I'm about an hour. I'm going on an hour in. And incentive structures. Okay. So reporting indicates, and we're still in the how fucked are we kind of stage. Reporting indicates that immigration detention has become a major revenue driver for private detention contractors. One thing you guys got to know, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, the numbers for people that are in houses of detention across the board took a hit. It's down. It was, I think it reached one of its lowest points in 2020. Hey, what's going on? We're just talking about political power, and I just finished up my little segment about Epstein. And now we're talking about private prisons. This is fun stuff. And so numbers are down for these private prisons in terms of people that are locked up. And one of the things about private prisons is one of the things you got to know about private prisons is they got contracts with states and federal state and the feds or whatnot to hold people and warehouse people. And so when those numbers are down, you're going to start seeing their revenue decline. A lot of times they get paid a per diem. Per diem is a daily amount that you get to maintain people in a residential environment. And they had to find a new revenue stream since since they were starting to see declining numbers. And so they pivoted, some of these places pivoted into immigration detention centers where the money is. And so now you're starting to see a lot of surge in immigration enforcement. And how that ties together is a lot of the people that own the people that own these private, the CEOs and stuff of these private prison companies, they donate, they're big donators to political campaigns and movements or whatnot. And people are jockeying to get seats on their boards and things like that when they enter the private sector. And so there's a lot of incentive to pull up a seat and make them happy by feeding them contracts and feeding them bodies. I'll just supporting the list number for Ryder here. And an advocate for preventing our prison population. Yep. There's a level of interconnectedness that would actually shock a lot of people, because my background was state case management. And one of my private goals when I was working with kids and families was I was trying to get them out and away from the fingers of the court system as quickly as possible. What do we need to do to satisfy the safety concerns in your case? What do you need to do to satisfy it so we can get them out of your lives? Because the longer the state stays in your life, the longer it will stay in your life, and the more they will mess with you. And so I was big about, let's get your case closed as quickly as possible. Let's address these issues. Let's make sure that we have some stability that we can maintain, and let's get this thing moving forward. And because the longer the state is involved, the more likely your kid is going to be institutionalized. One of the things that people don't know, the reason why like programs like Scared Straight have been debunked for so many years is one of the things that people think that, my kid's acting up, let's do Scared Straight. Let's do Scared Straight. If you do not want your kid to go to jail, do not introduce them to a jail. Do not normalize it. Do not put it in their brains. Scared straight programs didn't do shit. When they tracked the numbers, it didn't prevent people. It didn't prevent kids from going to jail. It accelerated it, because while they're doing all that barking and everything, and combination, especially when they're involved in their mental health care, you cannot heal in some institutions. That is 100% true. But people, reason why that show Beyond Scared Straight was very, very popular was because on some level, a lot of adults like to see people yell at bad kids. That's all it is. It's not necessarily, it's about catharsis. It's not about helping the kids out in any way, shape, or form. It's about, I get to see adults scream at bad kids. And look at all the memes that came off of Beyond Scared Straight, right? Like, people were memeing those kids getting screamed at and everything. Scared Straight programs, they don't do anything to reduce a kid's likelihood of going to jail. In fact, they increase it. And that's been the data for years and years and years and years and years. All the way before, decades before I was even doing case management and running residential youth shelters and alternative detention programs. Before I was running those programs, it was known that you don't do Scared Straight programs. They don't work. But people were pushing towards it because in their mind, they wanted to see bad kids get yelled at. And the level it propagandized an entire group of parents who were clamoring to put their kids in some weird kind of Scared Straight program to send them to, at the time it was the Douglas County Youth Center. And then the kids get in there and they realize this isn't really that bad. And that not wanting to go to jail kind of says, it's not too bad to go in there. And, Douglas County Youth Center wasn't too bad at the time. It wasn't that bad. It sucked, but not suck on the level that the parents wanted it to suck. And for some kids, it wasn't bad at all. In fact, I had kids, my shelter was set up so I had kids that got kicked out of the Douglas County Youth Center, the detention center. I had the kids that couldn't maintain there ended up in my shelter program. But parents thought that this was going to scare their kids, right? And then they go down there and realize it's not too bad. And it kind of sets them up for a fall until they get to like Tecumseh. And they're like, oh, wait a minute, this shit is real. Like, this is real. This is crucial. And so I'm saying all that to say this. This romanticization of incarceration and using jail to scare people is a bad thing. It's a bad thing across the board. I liken the institutional slavery, which usually started with poverty, then truancy, and of course mental health consult, then drug them into becoming uncomfortable in the institution instead of helping them live freely. Yeah. And that was a pivot. One of the things in the state of Nebraska specifically, allegedly, we aren't an incarceration state. We don't believe in youth detention. We are a restorative care model. And unfortunately, a lot of the powers that be, a lot of the people that are at the head of it do not realize that the system is set up to be a restorative care model. So when you get put in the Douglas County Youth Center, at least when I was doing case management, you didn't get sentenced to amount of time. You got placed there until they could find an appropriate replacement for you to go. Because it's about making sure that you were in the right level of care. So, a kid gets sent to DCYC. They don't say, well, you're in the Douglas County Youth Center for X amount of months or whatever. You're in there until they can find another placement for you. And that was the model. And a lot of people that are in seats of power, like specifically with the police, bro, like it was crazy how the cops did not know how the justice system worked, especially when it came to kids. Like even now, to listen to the Douglas County Sheriff, Aaron Hansen, the way he talks about youth crime and stuff, he has it's almost like he doesn't really have a concept of how the system is set up or supposed to work here for juvenile offenders, because he just wants to lock them up indefinitely or lock them up with definitive, you're going to get sentenced to a year in this jail. And my programs will always take the kids and we're like, okay, so let's try to get you out. Let's get you normalized. Let's get your medication managed. Let's get your education stuff caught up so that we can reintegrate you back into society and you're going to be successful. And we did it with mixed results. Some kids were ready for it. Some kids were not. Some kids had been too institutionalized. I had a kid that had been institutionalized in and out of jail since he was 8 years old. In and out of different levels of detention since he was 8 years old. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that they never pressed charges on his mom. And so the only way they could maintain him, the only way they could keep him in some kind of care environment was to charge him with shit. That's how they could keep him in stuff, because they never pressed charges against his mom and made him a ward of the state so that they could find appropriate placement or terminate parental rights and try to get him adopted. They never did that. So they would just charge him with shit and detain him, because that's the only way they could hold him in these residential things. And it happened from the time he was 8. By the time he was 15 years old, I was dealing with a 15-year-old grown man. He's the nicest little kid I've ever met, but he was super institutionalized. I don't know how you recover from that. I don't know how you recover from that. I don't know if it's meant for you to recover from that, to be quite honest with you. I'm not saying it was a malicious, but I am saying the system did create that. Okay. So I've kind of gone far afield. Here's the thing. So facilities have been reopened or proposed for conversion into ICE detention capacity. So this is how they're making money. Like when they're down on numbers, federally or state incarceration, they make it a ICE detention facility so that they can start getting those federal dollars and getting those federal contracts. Axios is reporting that one. Okay. There's occupancy guarantees. I'm familiar with this. Reviews of the private prison contract show that many historically included occupancy guarantees in the 80 to 100% range. So when they sign these deals with the states and federal government, they have a guarantee that they're going to be at least 80% full. And if you don't have that level, if you don't have that many people to put in there, you have to find those people. And so now we're starting to see where where they're converting into ICE detention facilities so they can maintain those ratios so that they don't have to pay penalties to these private prison companies. It's a dirty, dirty fucking game, y'all. It's dirty as hell. And so what happens is, because now also in the state of Nebraska, we're seeing there's legislation right now to criminalize homelessness effectively, where if you get caught sleeping outside somewhere, they can make it a misdemeanor, and then you get enough of them, they'll put you in jail and detain you. And it's not just locally here. There's other places where this is happening. Here's the thing. If you make it a crime to sleep outside and then do not provide a place for people to go, because people talk about the homeless shelters and whatnot. There's not enough capacity at these homeless shelters. I'm telling you now, I've done it. I've worked in it. I've rehoused families. There is not enough capacity at these homeless shelters. 1, 2, sometimes you have to split up families because it's not necessarily safe for some shelters for small children. 3, some people have pets and they don't want to see their animals get put down, so they stay out on the streets. Okay. The occupation institute funding is to keep most of our youth in the system because there weren't housing programs for them, and there are issues in the home. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's the truth. I see it as a mass attack on our minority freedoms as well, and I do too. I think because here's the thing: when you have increased police presence and a harsher judicial viewpoint on crime, where you think that the way to address crime is through increasing punishments and increasing the amount of hall monitors, essentially, without addressing the things that actually historically have been proven to drive crime in any neighborhood, in any population, with this lack of jobs, lack of access economically. You're setting up a situation where you're going to have more and more and more and more people getting locked up for lesser and lesser crimes. I used to tell people all the time about the concept of the board police officer. I used to see them all the time in North Omaha. That was my encounter with them. That's why a lot of my encounters with local law enforcement haven't really been positive, because I kept running into the bored cop. Didn't have anything better to do. And they were still on the clock, and they had to rationalize being on the clock. They had to look like they were working. And so what happens when you have to look busy? Otherwise, you're going to get punished. You find things to do. And typically those things to do involve messing and detaining people who are minding their own business. And that's where the concept of manufacturing crime comes from. Cops who have nothing better to do, in high crime neighborhoods, but they're sitting around with nothing better to do, so they have to find ways to look active on their shift. Otherwise, they're going to get in trouble. And a lot of arrest happened for specious things. The and cases end up getting thrown out, but at the same time, you still end up losing your freedom for a night just because some cop was bored. Arrests don't dictate convictions. Arrests and convictions are different things. It's because you get arrested for something doesn't mean that you committed a crime. I don't think people understand that. So what happens is you have these guarantees on occupancy, and governments and state, local, and federal governments have to constantly find ways to put more people in these private prisons so that they don't get hit with the fees that are attached to being below occupancy. Okay, and so when contracts reward filled beds, enforcement becomes economically relevant, becomes economically justifiable to some people, because the dehumanization that happens within the context of the court system, they don't see these people as anything but numbers on a sheet. And okay, so I got the bed filled. That's what they care about. Is this person guilty or not? No, I don't care. Are they fed? Do they get their medicine? No, I don't care. Is the bed filled? Yeah. Some lose more than one night. They lose jobs than housing. Yeah, that's exactly how it goes. And I don't think, like, when we talk to people about what's happening with ICE, where American citizens are getting detained by ICE for multiple days. And people are like, well, they released them, so it's not that big of a deal. It's a big deal if you lose your job because you just no showed all those shifts because you were on ICE hold and nobody knew who you were. That's a big deal. That can disrupt people's lives. And the lower you are on the economic hierarchy, in terms of money and stuff, the more detrimental detention for a day or two can be. When you have a house with a mortgage, you get grace periods and stuff. When it comes to rentals, if you're renting a spot, you don't get no grace period like that. There's more of a legal process when you own a home than when you're renting. And a lot of people who can't afford end up having to rent. And so their access to having a roof over their head is already precarious. And so now you go on an immigration hold for a couple of days, call and no show your shift in a place where the job market is depressed. And now you in a world of hurt. So when people talk about, oh, well, yeah, they caught this American citizen and had him on an ICE hold, but they released him. It wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, what's he mad about? This man lost his job because he disappeared for 3 days. What are you talking about? So there's so many layers to this. And a lot of times, and I learned this reading about systems theory. If you want to learn about systems theory, read The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. Fantastic book. He also has another book about some of the learning environment, learning business, or learning how do you call it, the learning organization, the dance of change. He had another book about getting people to change and whatnot. But if you want to learn systems theory, read Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. If you want to learn some of it. And it's the concept of standing on the shoreline casting stones. Okay. Some people are only concerned with the stones going into the water, if they're able to skip that stone across the water. When you start thinking about systems and how systems interact, you start looking to see where the ripples that are created go and where they intersect and where they collide, because that's where the damage is being done. That's where the change is actually happening, where the ripples collide with one another. A lot of times when you remove people from the action, when you remove the action from the consequence and you put space in between it, put time in between there as a barrier or as a factor, people disconnect cause and effect a lot of times. But if you want to learn, and that's why a lot of people don't see it. So when we talk to people about, yeah, such and such got jammed up on an immigration hold, they're American citizen, it's kind of bullshit. Oh, well, they got released. It's not that big of a deal. Yeah, it is if you lose your job. And now you're dealing with a new homeless family because this person got evicted because they couldn't pay their bills. There's levels to this. There's layers to this. And so, yep. Fifth discipline, Peter Singh introduced learning organizations that use systems, thinking, and personal mastery and mental models. Yep. And so I've read both of those. And those were kind of formative to when I took my first couple of where I was managing um, multiple staff, like when I was managing staff across all three shifts, 24/7, 24/7, three shifts. And so this helped me slide into that seat a little bit better and prep me to actually get my staff to where I needed them to be. But yeah, the fifth discipline is amazing when it starts talking about systems thinking. And most people aren't really fully aware of um, how systems interface with each other. It's the concept of like, because I used to have to go, we used to have to talk to different people in the legislature when I was managing my last shelter, and talk to them about policy initiatives that they were trying to change, and explain to them the damage that unfunded mandates do to residential facilities. Yeah, I don't know what that is. The damage that unfunded mandates do to residential facilities. And what we mean by that is we had one that came down where our facility got dinged because our washer and dryer weren't far enough apart. And what they wanted us to do was spend $20,000 to knock a wall down so that we can make sure that the washer and dryer were a couple more inches apart. And we had to fight back against it. And we're sitting there explaining to them, like, these things seem small on your end. These regulations seem really small on your end, but they can absolutely shut down somebody's ability to provide services on our end. You're sitting there on the lake casting stones with these laws that you think are going to improve people's quality of life. And what you're doing is you're removing quality of life from a lot of people because now you don't have facilities to house them. So, all right, let me power through the rest of this outline here. Okay. So Nebraska lawmakers are advancing a bill that will make public camping a misdemeanor and a condition state funding on enforcement. So basically, if you don't enforce this ordinance, then you're going to lose funding for different things that you want to do. And the reason why is because Omaha rejected a similar encampment ordinance after some public pushback, because we're like, well, we're going to criminalize people existing, because that's essentially what you're doing. Like I said, if you know anything about anything, there is not enough space in our shelters for the homeless population here. And you start getting out to Sarpy County, and there's no place for them to go. And so if you factor in Douglas and Sarpy County, there's not enough room, not enough bed space collectively to house every man, woman, and child that is experiencing some form of homelessness or houselessness. How are you able to raise your voice, show up at city council meetings, call your state legislator, and that's the way we do it. Because you got to make them aware of it. And the problem with it is the way our legislature is set up is this is going to go through. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that this is going to go through, because this is typically in Omaha, this is typically seen as an Omaha problem, even though it is across the state. Every county in this state is dealing with unhoused people, but it's seen as an exclusively Omaha problem. And a lot of the legislature seems to be primed to punish Omaha for anything. Yeah, well, they have room in jail. I think there's always a bed for you in jail. That's what I'm realizing. Like, they'll always make room for you in jail. Which is crazy. We can't get enough beds for homeless men, women, and children. And the largest population of homeless people in this state is children. People get that messed up all the time. What are you gonna do? You're gonna lock up the parents? Where the kids gonna go? You're gonna put them in foster care, and then what happens? Now you have more institutionalized kids that you have to work to extricate from the foster care system. It's wild work, and that's what I'm saying. When the state legislators make up laws, state senators, when they make up laws, a lot of times some of them are not cognizant of the ripples that they're creating for people. Some of them don't care. Like some of them are getting that private prison money, and they really don't care. The check, as long as the check clears, they don't care who gets impacted by it. They can pretend to care. They don't. But yeah, that's what we're up against. And so the way you advocate against it is just getting in your state senator's ear and letting them know, hey, you don't approve of this. And hopefully that there's enough people across the state of Nebraska that can and inform people, talk to people. Conversational level works really well. Explaining to people this is not a simple fix as people want to make it seem. Okay. But if sleeping outside becomes a misdemeanor, then survival is a violation. Where are you supposed to go if you don't have a house? There's no room in the shelter, or it's not safe for you to take your kids to the shelter, or you don't want your family split up, because that will happen. Or you have pets that you don't want to end up getting put in the pound. There's so many layers to this. And I think a lot of people assume that just because they have the stereotype of what homeless people are in their brain, yes, there are people that have drug issues. Yes, there are people that have mental health issues. Is locking them up the answer? Has it ever been the answer? Because if locking people up was the answer, then the United States would never have a crime problem ever again. Because we lock up more people than anybody for anything. Okay. There's verified evidence of a coordinated scheme linking detention, contractors, and homelessness policy. We have to create new criminals. We have to create new lawbreakers to make sure that we're within these occupancy promises. Okay. The concern is structural alignment. It's not some secret choreography. This is a structural alignment. Two things are lining up together. Okay. I'm going to wrap this up. Okay. Christian nationalism is a measurable thing. They're tracking it. And when we start getting into the Christian nationalism, that's that palindromic ultranationalism kind of thing, where you're in the process of palingenesis, where you're in this rebirth cycle where the country has to be cleansed or purged so we can return to this idealized version that existed in the past that never really existed. The version that people want to go back to never really exists in real life, but that's what they believe. Okay. And Christian nationalism is tied to white nationalism. These two things do exist in the same space. They live in the same hallway. You don't have to walk too many doors down from Christian nationalism to knock on the door of white nationalism. These guys share the same ideologues. They share a lot of the same theories and stuff like that. And when it comes down to it, it's all about establishing this group is the dominant group and purging everybody else who doesn't fall in line with the rest of that. And it's not. And I think Christian nationalism might be a misnomer because it's not Christ-like. When you get into the nationalism side of things, that's where you start running into a lot of conflicts with a lot of biblical teachings and things along those lines. But they find ways to rationalize it and find ways to marginalize people. Again, if you scratch a Christian nationalist, you're going to find a white nationalist. It's not that hard. Okay. Domestic extremist threats are very well documented. Okay. And we have corollaries in knowing what groups are the actual threats to domestic terrorism. Okay. The presence of oligarchs and their influence is academically supported. There's data that shows these things. Okay. Transparency gaps in the Epstein files are actively being suppressed. They're actively being suppressed. And yes, they're making attempts to investigate it, but you only can investigate it up until a certain level of cooperation from the administration. And if half the administration is implicated in the Epstein files, that investigation ain't going to do a damn thing. True. Christian nationalism has a hard time with the command, love thy neighbor, as our mayor preached this past Sunday. Yep. Those two things don't align. And that's one of the challenges that when people, like I said, it's two diametrically things, like the entire, the jumbo shrimp, old school jumbo shrimp thing. Um, being a nationalist isn't inherently Christian, but people do it anyway. And more times than not, Christian nationalists will not identify themselves as Christian nationalists. Very few of them will identify themselves as nationalists in any way, shape, or form. Some embrace it, others, most will not address it. Okay. But yeah, transparency gaps in the Epstein files are not being investigated right now. Like, they're not really being looked at, because you're basically saying we investigated ourselves and found we exonerated ourselves after investigating ourselves. Okay. High level officials have been given contradictory statements about their proximity to Epstein in general. Okay. Detention systems operate on occupancy incentives. I'm reading my notes here, so sorry. I'm not. It's been a long day. Detention systems operate on occupancy promises. You have to maintain a certain ratio. You have to be 80 to 100% full. Otherwise, you're going to start seeing the states and federal government get fined and having to pay and compensate these private prison entities for not having their beds full. And so when you're saying you have to have the bed full, what do you think happens with the law? The law ends up becoming a dragnet that captures more people. Okay. And being poor is moving towards criminal code. Like, if you don't have a place to live, you have to camp outside. They're trying to criminalize that. They're trying to make it put you in jail for a while behind that. And there's a reason behind it, because you're checking off somebody's box. As long as you can keep feeding a flow of people to fill those beds in these private jails that have occupancy standards, it is what it is. And even if you're not directly feeding them, you have to transfer somebody else to make room, and you transfer them to the private prison, and now they're filling their beds. It's crazy work. Okay. This is not about a villain who is operating in the shadows, y'all. Again, the way I said it is, this administration is not throwing a rock and hiding its hands. It's throwing a rock, smacking you in the head with it. And when you look at them, say, hey, man, you throw a rock? No, I didn't throw a rock. What you talking about, rock? They're just denying the rock got thrown in the first place after you're sitting there bleeding after getting smacked in the head with the rock. Okay. So we're talking about institutions that treat power as something to manage instead of something to restrain. Okay. And I would add another layer onto that, because when I was writing this, I was thinking about manage, but something to be hoarded. Power is being hoarded. And we're going to hoard up all the influence. That's exactly what exactly why Epstein existed for so long, bro. He was compiling leverage and power over people, and governments incentivized it, so they allowed him to operate essentially with impunity, with minimal investigative or legislative or criminal remedies. They allowed him to operate. That's some dark stuff, man. Like I said, this country was willing to feed children to monsters, just so that we could get intel on people and wield the influence over them. It's crazy work. So anyway, hopefully next week I'll be back to comic books. I'm going to be talking about Wonder Man. I'm going to probably be having my episode. Stay tuned next week, talking about the correlation between John Henryism and how I process grief. For those that don't know, John Henryism, for those that don't know, read the story about John Henryism, a working man who essentially worked himself to death. A black man who worked himself to death. He was celebrated, he was a hero, but he still worked himself to death. And my journey with how that works and how I've processed grief over the years, and the damage that it does. And hopefully I can teach my kids something a little bit better. But anyway, that's what I got for next time. So we're going to be chopping it up about Wonder Man. Absolute Batman, New Poison Ivy. I need to do an episode about that. So I'll be talking about that next week too. Because the New Poison Ivy is, again, more nightmare fuel. Absolute Batman is a horror comic book. And I think people don't realize that. They're sleeping on the fact, if you like EC Comics level horror, Absolute Batman is your book. Thank you. Yep. Thank you. We'll be here for John Here's episode. Let me know when to tune in. Tuesday nights is when I aim my live stream. Typically, I try to get started by 7:30. Tonight I had to feed the kids, and so I ran a little bit late. But yeah, Tuesday nights is when we're on the live stream. I'll see you later, Nita. Fair Nita. I will talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all your comments. Thanks for those that are watching. Those that wanted to tune in for the Epstein episode, this was part of it. I'm going to be taking a deeper dive. What I don't want to do is get into too much of the speculation and rumor mill BS that goes around, that passes for journalism covering this Epstein thing, because I don't think it does a service to the victims. I think it's sensationalizes a lot of stuff. But yeah, we'll be back with my absolute Batman review about the poison ivy stuff, John Henryism, processing grief, and my Wonder Man review next week. I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad to be back. I will talk to you later. It's been Blurting While Dad. It's been Brian. Talk to you later. Peace.